Eric Stromquist. Welcome to the Vegan Food Truck Business Podcast.
Thank you, Heather. I'm excited to be here.
We are going to talk about how we can run our vegan food trucks more efficiently, have better menu choices, better pricing, make sure there's a fast turnaround time to serve people, but also that we don't financially get into trouble doing all of this, because it can be a tricky situation trying to figure out food costs, especially when it fluctuates. Eric, in your world that you've experienced, what is one major problem that you see, whether it's starting a restaurant or any kind of a food business? What is that one major mistake when it comes to picking out the menu, food pricing, any of that?
Heather, I think the biggest problem is, and whether it's a restaurant or a food truck, is that oftentimes it's started by someone that has a passion for food. And in the food truck, it can be pretty specific. You have one item that you love, or you like one particular kind of ethnic food, or you want to mash up some ethnic foods into a fusion or something. Usually there's a lot of background in cooking, but very rarely is there any business background, and people don't tend to treat it as a business. You really have to get both parts right in order to be successful. I think that's the fundamental problem, is that you have to think of it like a business. Even a food truck, it's a small business to be sure, but it's a business. You have to get your mind set, because a lot of times it's just, I don't want to charge a lot because people can't afford it. They're struggling with money. That's not how you should set your pricing strategy. At the end of the day, you're going to be spending a lot of hours in that truck, and you want it to be worthwhile for you. And if you're making a ton of money, you can give it away. You can do stuff for the community, but you need to run a profitable business that works for you. That's the biggest problem. It gets into more specific ones, like pricing strategy. A lot of people don't base their pricing on what it's costing them to put an item out the window. That's a huge mistake.
Start with the menu itself. You walk up to a food truck, some of them have a bazillion things to choose from, and then another one that has maybe like 6 things, and you're like, wow, they don't have very many things to offer. But meanwhile, they're busy and people are buying from them. Why would somebody want to have very little to choose from versus having a whole bunch? And where do you think is the happy medium?
That's a great question. A philosophy of life is you're better off doing less and doing it well than you are trying to do a lot of stuff. My God, in a food truck, trying to be the Cheesecake Factory is nuts. The biggest problem with having an extensive menu in a food truck is not just limited space, but also time. The more complicated your menu items are, the longer it's going to take you to make them. And this is something that a lot of food truck operators don't understand, Heather, and I end up talking to them about this. In the restaurant business, the revenue calculation is really simple. It's your average check times however many customers you're going to serve. And in a restaurant, how many seats do you have and how often can you fill them? In a food truck, it's just how many people can walk up to the window and buy something. If it takes you 30 seconds to serve a customer, if you're serving hot dogs, you can do 120 transactions in an hour, right? But if it takes you 5 minutes to put the food together, then you can do 12, and you do the math. Sometimes it's startling when their eyes just get really big and go, oh, I hadn't thought of that. The trick is to come up with a menu that's attractive, but one that you can execute efficiently and quickly. And also the tendency with a lot of items on your menu is you end up carrying a lot of ingredients that maybe you use in one item or 2 items, and that's no bueno. Ideally, you want to construct a menu where you're utilizing ingredients in 2 or 3 or all of your menu items.
With food, we have spoilage. That doesn't necessarily happen in other types of businesses where
Right.
things can stay on the shelf a little bit longer. If you prep something and then it doesn't sell, then what do you do?
Right.
Have a special the next day that includes that?
No, it's a great point.
So pricing, talking to my clients, I'm like, okay, how did you decide how to price this? Oftentimes their answer is, well, I look around and see what other people are charging. Well, okay, that might be what the market can bear, but does that even cover your food costs is the question. Talk to me about that mentality, or how you go about pricing when you're designing a menu.
I end up having this conversation a lot, Heather, and the problem is, I would say the majority of people that open a food service operation base their pricing on what other people are doing and what they think the market will bear. I think with food trucks in particular, there's an expectation from customers that they're not going to pay prices like at Le Cirque. They're going to want something reasonably affordable. But I end up working with a lot of clients that aren't going to do clean monthly income statements, P&Ls. They're not going to do inventory. They're not going to do it on a regular basis, which means that even if you have income statements, your food cost percentage is going to be a roller coaster. The trick is to know exactly what each item costs. And that's something you can figure out. And there's lots and lots of sophisticated software out there now. And I don't recommend one or another. You can Google recipe costing software and you're going to get hundreds of options. My preference is I have an Excel spreadsheet that works just fine. And I've also done it with clients who, one of whom was in tears and shall remain nameless because she couldn't operate the software and even the Excel spreadsheet was too much. And I just sat down with her and we did it on paper with a pencil. It's really a pretty straightforward process. Of each ingredient you break down into some countable unit, usually ounces each, and add it all together. And then a common mistake is people omit packaging and condiments. And you need to count and the containers now can be very expensive, especially if you are eco-conscious and giving people compostable utensils and on and on. And I applaud that for sure, but it's going to add significant cost to your item. And condiments too. Not everyone's going to put a squirt 2 tablespoons of sriracha on their rice bowl, but you should assume they are. Price it accordingly. But once you get to your actual item cost and you're sure of it, then set your pricing. It's the old saw in the restaurant business for the profitability formula is 30, 30, 30, 10, right? 30% product cost, 30% payroll, 30% overhead, and 10% profit. That's kind of more or less accurate for a full service restaurant, but it depends entirely on the concept. And let's face it, in a food truck, your labor is probably you. Maybe you've got someone helping you. So your labor isn't going to be 30%. Your overhead isn't going to be 30%. So you can get away with a higher food cost, but I would argue that it absolutely should not be more than 40%.
And oftentimes with food carts or trucks, the truck is small and they have a commissary kitchen, which is another rent. Some spaces for these food trucks is unbelievably high. And when I look at how much they're paying in rent, it's what we were talking about before, efficiency and volume. Can you actually produce enough to cover your rent each day? And what does that foot traffic look like? When people are designing a menu, since food spoils, take into consideration the volume of how many people come through there.
That's a great point. In many instances, they are paying to rent commissary kitchen space and do prep. And usually storage is at a premium even in those places. Sometimes you get lucky and you find a spot that's got a lot of refrigerated or even frozen storage. But the really critical issue people just have a hard time wrapping their heads around, really believing in, is that I know you're capable of doing more complicated, higher end food, but how quickly can you prepare it and how quickly can you serve it? Because I said earlier, the revenue calculation is simple math and it doesn't lie. You've got to be able to serve customers quickly if you want to make any money. Nobody wants to stand around, especially if it's cold and rainy, for 5 or 7 minutes waiting for their food.
Here in Portland, we have a big food cart culture. It's interesting how the prices suddenly like, why am I paying $18 for a pad thai? That just seems wrong. Mm-hmm. I understand that they're trying to cover their costs and they're basing it on the market, but how can the food truck keep their prices more in line with what people expect so people don't feel like they're getting price gouged?
Yeah, so setting up the menu, Heather, you have to reel yourself in. You're not trying to get a Michelin star. You're trying to make money. And then for a lot of these people, their long-term goal, their dream is to morph into a brick and mortar. And if you get to that point, great. Then think about adding some of these menu items, but you have to discipline yourself when you're operating a food truck and focus on what you can serve and what you can serve affordably. You can't price yourself out of that market. People aren't going to stand out in the cold for 7 minutes waiting for an $18 pad thai. $12, maybe. You have to give the market what it's asking for. And a lot of people in the restaurant business make this mistake. I sure did when we opened Hot Lips Pizza back in the 1980s. We were going to sell gourmet pizza and everybody was going to love that and all these exotic ingredients. And hey, what do you know? 2/3 of our sales were cheese and pepperoni. A better strategy is to give the customers what they want, even if it's not your favorite thing in the world. But don't try and do it all in your truck.
What else can you do to speed up efficiency with a food truck?
Try to avoid menu items that require a la carte cooking. If it can be prepared in advance and it's not going to degrade in quality that quickly, you're on the right track. You want to just be able to assemble items and serve them. I understand that for a lot of foodies, cooks, chefs, that's not a very interesting or exciting concept. I get it. But if you want to run a food truck profitably, you need to consider that above all else. But time is money. Your top line, your revenue is going to be entirely dependent on how quickly you can serve customers.
Any last thing that you want to share that I didn't go over?
In general, I tell my clients this all the time is don't be afraid to fail. There are no losses, only lessons. If you try something and it doesn't work, and then that can be a small thing. If you put something on your menu that doesn't sell, get it off. Even the business itself, it's not for everyone. And absolutely don't be afraid to fail. I've learned way more from my failures in life than I did my modest successes.
Yeah, and share your failures too. If people are doing similar things, talk to them, see what struggles that they've had, and we can all learn from each other. Because I think of being an entrepreneur is also being like a scientist. You're always testing your ideas, test it out and see if anybody wants it.
Great advice, Heather. And just to piggyback on what you were saying, it's really true. There are exceptions, but by and large, the small business community, they treat each other as brothers and sisters, not competitors, and they will share a lot of information. And before you start your food truck, it's a great idea to just go around and talk to people and see what they think about it. And they more often than not are going to share a lot of information.
Yeah, exactly. The grim reality of owning a business, especially a food truck, like you mentioned, they're probably the ones in the truck all day long, prepping and serving and doing all of the things. Then they got to also manage their money and inventory and all that kind of stuff too. A lot of pokers in the fire.
Maybe we can tie this up with a bow here. Back to what I said at first, Heather, and it's really true, is there are a lot of people in the restaurant business that are amazingly talented chefs, but unless you treat it as a business, chances are you're going to struggle and maybe fail.
How can they treat it more like a business?
Well, you have to think in terms of dollars and cents. A lot of places aren't going to do monthly P&Ls or income statements, but your prime costs, product cost, and labor, you can watch your labor cost. You know what your sales are, and you know what your payroll is for a certain period. What's the percentage? And you know what your items cost, you know what you're charging, you know what your food cost ought to be. Those are two concrete steps you can take to manage your product cost and your payroll. If you do those two things, then you're running a business. You're watching the numbers, and you know this. You live in spreadsheets. They don't, but that doesn't require you living in spreadsheets very long. And
right.
If you do those two things and do it regularly, then you're running a business.
Yeah, exactly. One major mistake I see when they're first starting out a business, they're not thinking about how they're going to compile all their financials. So they're like, oh, I'll just put this on my personal credit card. I'll just put this over here. I'll just Venmo somebody this and do this. And now suddenly they have no idea what their costs are. That's where I see a lot of businesses get into trouble. You ask them about their profit margins, they have no idea. Then maybe they're out of something, then they go to just a regular supermarket and buy the ingredients, and now it's a different cost. There's a lot to think about. So
there really is. But yeah, I mean, that's another really common mistake, and it's a bad one, is commingling your personal and your business expenses. Some of the people we end up talking to don't even have a business account set up separately, and then you end up giving somebody a box at the end of the year, and they're going to charge you $3,000 to try and sort out your mess.
Exactly. Tell us a little bit about your background. You mentioned that you started Hot Lips, which I had gone to Hot Lips Pizza many times as a Portland State student. I would go over to Hot Lips and get a slice because, you know, when you're a college student, that's like what you can afford. Now you're retired, but you worked at a culinary school. Now, what are you doing in your life?
I had worked for 10 years at another place, which used to be Western Culinary Institute and morphed into Le Cordon Bleu, and left Oregon Culinary in 2016, I believe. And Portland just kind of wore us out. And we had been in love with Astoria and just decided, you know what? We're looking for a slower pace, a smaller town, and we wanted to get out of Portland, and we moved to Astoria just up 6.5 years ago, and we love it. I've been working the last 3.5 years with the Small Business Development Center down here, which is tied to Clatsop Community College, and we offer free advising to anyone that wants it. You know, we're the SBDCs all over the country really are funded mostly by the Small Business Administration. We're able to give free advice. We also teach programs. I do a little teaching, which I love, and those usually cost a little bit of money. It's all about building small businesses in our community, and Astoria in particular. This North Coast area is just really a tight-knit community. It's been a lot of fun and gratifying to work with people.
That's awesome. They have so much exposure to other people that are in the business community that they are great people to network with. If you're looking for something, they might be able to hook you up with somebody that does that. Thank you so much, Eric, for being on the show today.
Of course, I really enjoyed it.